Imagine being a woman in 1957 who defies all the social conventions of the time, riding a powerful motorcycle through the rural roads of Idaho while men stop to look with a mixture of admiration and disapproval. You go out for a routine ride on a spring afternoon, wave to neighbors, and simply disappear. No trace on the road, no witness to an accident. Only silence, where before there was the roar of a V-twin engine. And when the truth finally emerges 68 years later, it comes from the bottom of a lake so deep and dark that it kept its secret through entire generations, while theories and speculations flourished above the tranquil surface. Before we dive into this story that will make you question everything about disappearances and the secrets that water keeps, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because the case you're about to discover is one of the most intriguing mysteries in Idaho's history. This isn't just the story of a woman who vanished. It's the story of how someone can defy the expectations of an entire era, of how water can completely hide a half-ton motorcycle for decades, and of how sometimes the answers we seek are literally beneath the surface, waiting patiently to be revealed. The story begins in an era when women motorcyclists were extremely rare, when teachers were expected to be examples of conservative behavior, and when disappearing on the rural roads of Idaho meant simply evaporating without leaving a trace. Ashley Marie Mitchell was 31 years old in May 1957, and to anyone in Sandpoint, Idaho, she was a fascinating contradiction. During the week, the respectable and dedicated teacher who taught English literature at Sandpoint High School. On weekends, the woman in a leather jacket who rode a red Indian chief through the mountain roads, blonde hair flying in the wind, defying every expectation of how a woman should behave in the 1950s. At 5 feet 7 inches tall, with an athletic build from someone who spent hours outdoors, naturally wavy blonde hair that she usually kept in a professional bun during the week, but let loose on weekends, and green eyes that shone with an independence that made some men uncomfortable and other women secretly envious. Ashley possessed that rare combination of beauty, intelligence, and absolute determination to live life on her own terms. Born on March 12, 1926, in Boise, Idaho, Ashley grew up in an unconventional family by the standards of the time. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, was an engineering professor at Boise State University and fervently believed that women should have the same educational opportunities as men. Her mother, Margaret Mitchell, worked as a nurse, uncommon for married women at the time, and completely supported her husband in raising an independent daughter. Ashley had an older brother, Robert, 3 years older, who taught her from an early age not to accept limitations based on gender. Ashley was always academically brilliant. She graduated as valedictorian of Boise High School in 1944, at 18 years old, right in the middle of World War II. While many of her male classmates were serving overseas, Ashley secured a full scholarship to the University of Idaho in Moscow, where she studied English literature. She graduated with honors in 1948, at 22 years old, with a bachelor's degree and ambitious plans. But what really defined Ashley wasn't her academic achievements, however impressive they were. It was her passion for motorcycles. This began in 1946, during her second year at university. Robert, who had returned from the war, bought a used motorcycle, a pre-war Harley-Davidson. He taught Ashley to ride during the summer, and she instantly fell in love with the feeling of freedom, power, and absolute control that came from being on 2 wheels. In 1949, at 23 years old and working as a substitute teacher in Boise, Ashley did something scandalous for a young woman of the time. She used her savings to buy her own motorcycle. Not just any motorcycle, but a 1948 Indian chief. A powerful 1200cc machine with a 74 cubic inch V-twin engine, capable of reaching speeds of over 160 kilometers per hour. The motorcycle was bright red with chrome details and cost her $685, almost 3 months' salary. Ashley's family supported her, but the community at large was shocked. Women simply didn't do such things in 1949. Some people whispered that Ashley must be mentally disturbed. Others suggested she would never find a husband with such masculine hobbies. But Ashley didn't care. She had found something that made her feel truly alive. In 1952, Ashley accepted a full-time position as an English literature teacher at Sandpoint High School, a small town in northern Idaho near the border with Washington. Sandpoint, situated on the shores of Lake Pend Oreille, one of the deepest lakes in the United States, with depths of up to 350 meters in some spots, had a population of about 3,500 people. It was a community of loggers, fishermen, and railway workers, conservative but with that independent spirit characteristic of the interior Northwest. Ashley rented a small apartment on the second floor of a Victorian house on First Avenue, 2 blocks from the school. The apartment had 1 bedroom, a combined living room kitchen, and, crucially, a small garage on the ground floor that the landlord agreed to let her use for her motorcycle. The Indian chief became as well known in Sandpoint as Ashley herself. People heard the distinctive roar of the engine and knew that the motorcycle teacher was passing by. At school, Ashley was respected and admired. She had the rare gift of making classical literature come alive for teenagers. She taught Shakespeare as if the characters were real people with real problems. She had her students debate Hamlet's motivations, argue about Elizabeth Bennet's choices, analyze the symbolism of Moby Dick. Her classes were the most popular in the school, and multiple former students would later credit Ashley with awakening in them a love of reading. But there was a clear division in Ashley's life. During the week, she was Miss Mitchell. Hair in a bun, modest dresses below the knee, practical low-heeled shoes, reading glasses hanging on a chain. She was professional, reserved, the embodiment of respectability. On weekends, she transformed. Jeans, motorcycle boots, black leather jacket, red scarf around her neck, protective goggles. She let her hair down or tied it in a long braid. She mounted the Indian chief and disappeared into the mountain roads around Sandpoint, sometimes for hours, exploring every secondary road, every trail, every panoramic view. Ashley wasn't married, which in 1957 for a 31-year-old woman generated considerable speculation. It wasn't for lack of suitors. Several men in Sandpoint and some teachers at the school had shown interest. But Ashley had high standards and zero interest in sacrificing her independence. "Why should I trade my freedom for cooking dinners and washing someone's shirts?" she once said to her best friend in Sandpoint, a nurse named Barbara Foster. Barbara, who was 28 years old and worked at Bonner General Hospital, was one of the few people in Sandpoint who truly understood Ashley. They met in 1953 at a public library meeting, and a deep friendship formed based on shared interests in literature and a shared desire to live lives that didn't strictly conform to social expectations. Barbara was married to a railway engineer named James Foster, but the marriage was more a partnership of equals than the traditional dynamic of the time. Ashley had a predictable routine during the week. She woke at 6 o'clock, prepared coffee and scrambled eggs, read the newspaper. She walked the 10 minutes to school, arriving at 7:30 to prepare her lessons. She taught from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then stayed another hour or two grading papers or helping students. She dined alone at the small-town diner or cooked something simple at home. She read until late, Ashley voraciously consumed books, maintaining a personal library of over 300 volumes in her small apartment. But it was on weekends that Ashley truly lived. Saturdays and Sundays, if the weather permitted, she was on the road. Sometimes she rode alone, enjoying the solitude and the meditative feeling of long trips through the mountains. Other times, she participated in informal gatherings with the few other motorcyclists in the region. All men who were initially skeptical about a woman rider, but who quickly learned that Ashley could outperform most of them in both skill and courage. The Indian chief was Ashley's most precious possession. She kept it in impeccable condition, regularly cleaning and polishing, doing all basic maintenance herself. She had learned basic motorcycle mechanics from Robert, and taking it to the only motorcycle mechanic in Sandpoint, a man named George Patterson, for more complex services. George, 53 years old and a lifelong rider, had immense respect for Ashley. "She knows that machine better than most men know their cars," he used to say. Ashley had few vices. She didn't smoke, rarely drank beyond an occasional glass of wine. Her indulgence was coffee, strong and black, consumed in quantities that worried Barbara. She also had a taste for speed that some considered dangerous. Ashley regularly rode her Indian chief at speeds that exceeded rural limits, though she always controlled herself within city limits. There was a subtle melancholy in Ashley that those close to her sometimes perceived. She loved teaching, loved her students, loved Sandpoint. But there were moments, usually late at night, when she was alone with her books, when she wondered if she had chosen the right life. She had sacrificed marriage and family for independence. She had chosen adventure over security. These were choices she didn't regret, but they sometimes weighed on her in ways she rarely verbalized. Her parents, Thomas and Margaret, now 61 and 59 years, old respectively, and still living in Boise, worried about Ashley but supported her. They visited Sandpoint 2 or 3 times a year, always marveling at the life their daughter had built. Robert, now 34 years old, married with 3 children, lived in Portland, Oregon. He and Ashley maintained regular contact through letters and occasional phone calls. In May 1957, Ashley was in a good place in her life. The school year was almost over, just 3 more weeks until summer vacation. She had saved enough money for a long motorcycle trip she was planning for July. An epic journey to the Oregon coast and back, something she had been planning for 2 years. Her students were doing well. Her health was excellent. The Indian chief was running perfectly after a complete overhaul that George Patterson had completed in April. There was only one small but persistent problem. A few weeks earlier, in mid-April, Ashley had noticed that a car, a black Chevrolet of an 1800, an older model, seemed to be following her occasionally when she rode on weekends. She had seen it 3 or 4 times on different roads, always keeping distance, but clearly following her. When she mentioned it to George Patterson, he frowned. "You should report that to the sheriff," he suggested, but Ashley had dismissed it. "Probably just someone curious about a woman rider," she said. "They always give up eventually." But the black car didn't give up, and on a spring afternoon that seemed perfectly ordinary. The presence of that mysterious vehicle would become terribly relevant. Ashley Mitchell was about to embark on her last motorcycle ride, and the mystery of her disappearance would haunt Sandpoint for nearly 7 decades, until the water finally revealed what it had kept in the cold, dark depths of Lake Pend Oreille. The morning of May 18, 1957, dawned clear and pleasant over Sandpoint, Idaho. It was a Saturday, and the weather was perfect for riding. Temperature of 18 degrees Celsius at 8 o'clock in the morning, with a forecast to reach 24 degrees in the afternoon. The sky was partly cloudy, but nothing threatening. The wind was light, about 8 kilometers per hour coming from the north. For Ashley, these were ideal conditions. She woke at 7:30, later than during the week, but still early by weekend standards. She prepared her usual coffee, pancakes with maple syrup, and sat at the small table in her kitchen, mentally planning her route for the day. There was a secondary road about 30 kilometers east of Sandpoint, along the north shore of Lake Pend Oreille, that she wanted to explore. She had heard from other riders that it offered spectacular views of the lake. At 9 o'clock, Ashley put on her riding clothes, faded but sturdy jeans, white t-shirt, her favorite black leather jacket that she had worn for 8 years and was perfectly broken in and comfortable, brown motorcycle boots that reached mid-calf, and her red scarf that she tied around her neck. She tied her blonde hair in a braid that she tucked inside the jacket. She put on her protective goggles, necessary to protect her eyes from insects and debris at highway speeds. At 9:30, she descended the external stairs from her apartment to the garage on the ground floor. The Indian chief was there, gleaming under the light filtering through the small garage window. Ashley had washed and polished it the night before, and the bright red of the fuel tank reflected like a mirror. She did a quick check. Adequate oil level, good tire pressure to the touch, transmission chain properly lubricated, brakes responding correctly. At 9:45, she pushed the motorcycle out of the garage to the street. She mounted, adjusted herself in the leather saddle, turned on the ignition, and started it. The V-twin engine roared to life with that deep, pulsing sound characteristic of an Indian chief. A sound she loved more than music. She let the engine warm up for 2 minutes while she put on her goggles and leather gloves. Mrs. Henderson, the 72-year-old landlady who lived on the first floor of the house, came out to the front porch. "Going for a ride, dear?" she asked, as she always did. Mrs. Henderson had initially disapproved of having a motorcyclist tenant, but over 5 years had developed maternal affection for Ashley. "I'm going to explore the north shore of the lake," Ashley replied, shouting, slightly over the sound of the engine. "I'll be back by 4 o'clock. "Drive carefully," shouted Mrs. Henderson. Ashley waved, put the motorcycle in first gear, and departed. The clock in the church tower in downtown Sandpoint marked exactly 9:50 when she passed. Several people saw her. It was impossible not to notice the red Indian chief with Ashley riding. Among those who saw her was Frank Morrison, owner of the hardware store, who was sweeping the sidewalk in front of his store. "There goes Miss Mitchell," he commented to his wife. "That woman is going to kill herself on that machine someday." George Patterson also saw her. He was in his motorcycle shop working on a Harley-Davidson when he heard the unmistakable sound of Ashley's Indian chief passing. He came out and waved. Ashley honked in response, 2 short honks, her usual greeting. Ashley rode east through Sandpoint, then took State Highway 200 going east, along the south shore of Lake Pend Oreille. Traffic was light on a Saturday morning. Some farmers' pickup trucks, occasional tourist cars. Ashley maintained a speed of about 80 kilometers per hour, respecting the limits but not being overly cautious. At approximately 10:15, she stopped at a small gas station in Hope, a tiny community about 25 kilometers east of Sandpoint. The attendant, a 20-year-old young man named Danny Wright, served her. "Fill the tank, please," said Ashley, dismounting and stretching her legs. "That's a beautiful machine," commented Danny, admiring the Indian chief. 1948? "Good eye," said Ashley, smiling. "You know about motorcycles?" "A bit. My cousin had an Indian before the war. Never saw a woman riding one, though." "Well, now you have," said Ashley good-naturedly. She paid for the fuel, $2.40, and bought a bottle of Coca-Cola that she drank while checking her road map. Danny watched her study the map. "Looking for something specific?" he asked. "There's a secondary road along the north shore, around East Hope Road. Do you know it?" "Yes, it goes to the lake. Pretty view, but the road is kind of rough in some places. Has some gravel stretches." "I can handle gravel," said Ashley confidently. She finished her Coca-Cola, returned the bottle, 5-cent deposit, mounted the motorcycle again. "Thanks for the fuel." Danny watched her leave, the sound of the engine gradually fading in the distance. He checked his watch. 10:35. Later, he would be one of the last people confirmed to have seen Ashley Mitchell alive. Ashley continued east for a few more kilometers, then turned north on a smaller road that led toward the north shore of the lake. The road became progressively more isolated. Less traffic, more forest, occasional glimpses of the deep blue water of Lake Pend Oreille through the trees. Around 11 o'clock, she would have reached the area she wanted to explore, a stretch of road that ran parallel to the lake, offering spectacular views but also being quite remote. There were no houses in this section, only dense pine forest and some occasional clearings with access to the lake shore. And then, at some point in that following hour, something happened. Something that made Ashley Mitchell and her Red Indian chief disappear completely, as if they had been erased from existence. When 4 o'clock passed without Ashley returning, Mrs. Henderson became slightly worried, but not alarmed. Ashley occasionally arrived a bit late from her rides, but when 5 o'clock came, then 6 o'clock, the worry transformed into something heavier. Mrs. Henderson called Barbara Foster. "Barbara, do you know where Ashley went today?" She mentioned something about exploring the north shore of the lake. "Why?" "She said she'd be back at 4 o'clock. It's already 6 o'clock and she hasn't returned." There was a pause, then Barbara's voice, now tense. "That's not like Ashley. She always lets us know if she's going to be late." At 7 o'clock in the evening, Barbara and her husband James went to Ashley's apartment. Mrs. Henderson let them in. Everything was exactly as Ashley had left it. Breakfast washed and put away, weekday clothes hanging in the closet, books stacked on the bedside table. And crucially, her wallet was there, containing her driver's license, $23 in cash. Identification cards. "She wouldn't take her wallet riding," said Barbara, "but she always has some money in her pocket. And her identification." At 7:30 in the evening, James Foster called the Bonner County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Daniel Cooper answered personally. He knew Ashley. Everyone in Sandpoint knew her. "Did she have a planned route?" he asked. "North shore of the lake, leaving from Hope," said James. "She left at 9:50. Should have been back at 4 o'clock. "It's getting dark now," said Cooper, looking out the window. "I'll send a deputy to start checking that area, but we have to wait until morning for a full search." Deputy Ronald Hayes departed in his patrol car, driving slowly along State Highway 200 and then through the secondary roads north of the lake, using his flashlight to illuminate the road shoulders, looking for any sign of a crashed motorcycle. He found nothing. No skid marks, no piece of metal, no sign of Ashley Mitchell or her Indian chief. On the morning of Sunday, May 19th, the largest search operation in Sandpoint's history began. Sheriff Cooper mobilized all his deputies, called for volunteers from the town, and even contacted the Idaho National Guard. More than 100 people participated in the search. On foot, in cars, some in boats scanning the lake shores. They found the gas station in Hope, where Ashley had stopped. Danny Wright confirmed she had been there at 10:35, that she seemed completely normal, that she had said she was going to East Hope Road. The search teams focused intensely on that area, 15 kilometers of secondary road along the north shore of the lake. They walked every meter. They checked every clearing, every trail, every beach access. They searched ravines. They climbed rocky slopes. They checked abandoned cabins. They found nothing. No sign of Ashley. No sign of the motorcycle. No evidence that she had ever been there. "It's as if she flew away," said one of the frustrated search volunteers. The Red Indian Chief was large and distinctive. It wasn't something that could be easily hidden. If she had fallen into any of the ravines along the road, it would be visible. If she had gone off the road into the forest, there would be a trail. Broken trees, crushed vegetation, but there was nothing. The search continued for 5 days. Small planes flew over the area, pilots looking for any reflection of red or chrome metal. Divers checked some of the shallower areas of the lake near the shore, but Lake Pend Oreille was vast, 43 kilometers long, up to 1,150 meters wide in some spots, and extraordinarily deep. Divers could only check small, shallow areas. The real depths of the lake, going down to 350 meters in some spots, were completely inaccessible with 1957 diving technology. Investigators also pursued other angles. The black car that Ashley had mentioned following her was taken seriously. Sheriff Cooper issued a request for information about any black Chevrolet seen in Idaho, the area. Several leads emerged, but all led to dead ends. People with legitimate explanations for being on the roads. Theory of crime couldn't be ruled out. A woman alone on remote roads was vulnerable. But there was no body, no motorcycle, no physical evidence of crime. And Ashley wasn't wealthy. She had nothing worth kidnapping or stealing except the motorcycle itself. The most likely theory, though unsatisfactory, was that Ashley had somehow gone off the road and fallen into the lake. Maybe she lost control on a patch of gravel. Maybe an animal crossed in front of her. Maybe a sudden mechanical failure. If she had plunged directly into the lake at one of the deepest points, she and the motorcycle could have sunk to depths where they would never be found with 1957 technology. But how? The shores along East Hope Road were largely rocky or with dense vegetation. There weren't many places where a vehicle could simply plunge straight into the water. And if she had, surely there would be marks on the shore, disturbed vegetation, something. Unless there was a specific point, a specific configuration of circumstances where a motorcycle could simply disappear into the water without leaving obvious trace. But finding such a point in kilometers of coastline would be impossible. Ashley Mitchell was declared legally dead in May 1962, 5 years after her disappearance. Her parents, devastated, inherited her apartment full of books, her clothes, all the small things that made up a life. The Indian chief, or rather, the paperwork for the Indian chief, was declared lost. George Patterson cleaned and sold the motorcycle tools that Ashley kept in her garage, donating the money to a literature scholarship at Sandpoint High School in her name. And so the mystery entered the files. One more unsolved disappearance in the vast rural expanses of America. Ashley Mitchell became a local legend, the subject of occasional speculation, a cautionary tale about the dangers of riding alone, or depending on who was telling it, an inspiring story about a woman who lived courageously on her own terms until the end. But Ashley hadn't flown away. She had been there all along, in the cold, dark depths of Lake Pend Oreille, waiting patiently for technology that didn't yet exist to finally reveal her. The years transformed Sandpoint. The town grew modestly. Tourism increased as people discovered the beauty of northern Idaho. Old roads were paved and new ones built. Lake Pend Oreille remained majestic and mysterious, its depths still largely unexplored. Mrs. Henderson lived until 1973, dying at 88 years old. Until the end, she kept Ashley's apartment exactly as it was for almost a year after the disappearance, secretly hoping that Ashley would simply return one day. Eventually, she was forced by financial necessity to rent to someone else, but she never stopped wondering what had happened to the young teacher who had loved to ride so much. Barbara Foster and her husband James remained in Sandpoint until their retirement in 1985, when they moved to Seattle. Barbara died in 2011 at 86 years old. Among her belongings, her daughter found a box of letters, correspondence between Barbara and Ashley during the years they were friends. Ashley's last letter was dated May 15, 1957, 3 days before the disappearance. In it, Ashley wrote, "I'm so excited about the coming summer, Barbara. My big motorcycle trip is finally going to happen. I feel like something wonderful is coming." George Patterson continued operating his motorcycle shop until 1980, when he retired at 76 years old. He died in 1994. Until the end, he kept a photograph of Ashley with her Indian chief on a wall of his shop, the only photo anyone had taken of her with the motorcycle, captured in 1953. Under the ETDB photo, a simple plaque, "Ashley Mitchell, the best rider I ever knew." Danny Wright, the young gas station attendant who was one of the last people to see Ashley, eventually bought that gas station and operated it for 40 years. He told Ashley's story to anyone who would listen, always ending, "She seemed so happy, so alive. And then she just disappeared. It never made sense." Sheriff Daniel Cooper retired in 1975 after 30 years in law enforcement. Ashley's disappearance remained as one of the unsolved cases that haunted him. "We searched everywhere," he would say. "How does a woman and a motorcycle simply evaporate?" Ashley's parents, Thomas and Margaret, never fully recovered. Thomas died in 1971 at 75 years old. Margaret in 1978 at 80 years old. Both went to their graves, never knowing what had happened to their daughter. Robert, Ashley's brother, lived until 2018, dying at 95 years old. Until the end, he kept the old Harley-Davidson he had taught Ashley to ride on. He could never sell it, couldn't let go of that tangible connection to the sister who had disappeared. As the decades passed, Ashley's case became more obscure. For new Sandpoint residents, it was just an old story, if they knew it at all. For descendants of those who knew Ashley, it was a family anecdote. "My grandmother knew this teacher, who disappeared riding a motorcycle in the 50s. And then, in 2025, modern technology revealed what human searches couldn't. An underwater research organization called Depth Discovery, which used high-resolution side-scan sonar and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, to map deep lakes, was conducting a 3-year mapping project of Lake Pend Oreille. The lake, due to its extraordinary depths and occasional use by the U.S. Navy for submarine acoustic testing, was of scientific interest. On July 7, 2025, the team was mapping a section along the north shore of the lake, in an area near where East Hope Road ran parallel to the water. The depth in this specific area was about 4 to 6 meters near the shore, before dropping dramatically to over 50 meters, just 30 meters from the coast. The sonar detected an anomaly on the bottom, a shape that didn't match natural rocks or submerged logs. The team deployed an ROV with high-definition cameras to investigate. What the cameras revealed made the team freeze in silent shock. On the lake bottom, at approximately 4 meters depth, partially buried in sediment but still clearly visible, was a motorcycle. And not just any motorcycle, but one that still had recognizable traces of red paint. Near the motorcycle, also partially buried, was a human skeleton dressed in remains of a leather jacket and boots. "My God!" whispered the team leader, Dr. Sarah Kim, 43 years old, and an oceanographer specializing in underwater archaeology. "How long has this been here?" The discovery was immediately reported to authorities. On July 10th, professional divers from the Idaho State Police descended to the site. Recovery was careful and methodical, taking 2 days. The skeleton was brought to the surface first, followed by the motorcycle, surprisingly intact considering 68 years submerged. Identification was relatively quick. The motorcycle had a chassis number visible even after decades submerged. Indian Chief, 1948, number 348CC127. Records revealed it had been purchased by Ashley Marie Mitchell of Boise, Idaho in 1949. The skeleton, based on forensic analysis, was of a woman with estimated age of 30 to 40 years at the time of death. Fragments of deteriorated wallet in the jacket pocket contained a partially legible identification card with the name Ashley Mitchell. Missing since 1957. Found, teacher and motorcycle discovered at bottom of Lake Pend Oreille after 68 years, screamed the headlines. The story quickly became national. It had all the elements that capture imagination. Decades-old mystery, pioneering woman defying social norms, dramatic discovery. Ashley's nephew, Robert's son, a 70-year-old man named Thomas Mitchell, traveled from Portland to Sandpoint for what would finally be a proper funeral for the aunt he vaguely remembered from his childhood. "My father talked about her until his last day," Thomas told reporters. "He always wondered. Now, we finally know." The accident reconstruction took weeks, but eventually painted a clear picture. There was a specific point along East Hope Road where the road made a sharp curve. On the outside of the curve, there was a short but steep slope, perhaps 3 meters, that led straight to the water. In 1957, this slope was covered by dense vegetation that obscured it from the road. Over decades, erosion had changed the configuration, but in 1957, it was almost invisible. Ashley, riding at moderate speed, probably entered the curve. Maybe there was loose gravel. Danny Wright had mentioned the road had patches of gravel. Maybe she simply miscalculated the curve on unfamiliar terrain. The motorcycle went off the road. Ashley tried to brake but was already on the slope, and both she and the Indian chief plunged straight into the water. The impact with the water at 50 or 60 kilometers per hour would have been devastating. Analysis of the skeleton revealed severe cranial trauma. Ashley probably died on impact or lost consciousness immediately. The heavy motorcycle and Ashley sank quickly to 4 meters depth. The lake current, combined with sediment, gradually partially covered them. The dense vegetation on the shore in 1957 means that even if someone had been looking at that exact moment, they might not have seen the accident happen. And once motorcycle and rider were submerged, there was nothing visible from the shore or even from the water. No reflection of metal, no surface disturbance. Just the cold, dark water of Lake Pend Oreille, keeping one more secret. The searches in 1957 had been extensive, but with fatal limitations. Divers checked some shallow areas, but they didn't have the technology or resources to scan kilometers of coastline at even modest depths of 4 to 6 meters. Land searchers looked along the shore, but dense vegetation obscured the entry point. They probably passed within meters of where Ashley lay, with no way to know. Ashley Mitchell, was finally buried in August 2025 in Forest Cemetery in Sandpoint, in a section overlooking Lake Pend Oreille that she had loved so much. The ceremony was small. Thomas Mitchell, some distant cousins, local historians, and surprisingly, 3 women motorcyclists in their 60s and 70s who came from other parts of Idaho to honor a pioneer they had never known. The headstone read, Ashley Marie Mitchell, 1926 to 1957. Teacher, rider, pioneer, ride free forever. The Indian chief, after being carefully preserved and partially restored by specialists, was donated to the Idaho Historical Museum in Boise, where it is now on display with a plaque telling the complete story of Ashley Mitchell. Visitors can see the motorcycle that represented freedom and independence for a woman in an era when such things were rare, can read about her life and disappearance, can reflect on courage and tragedy. Ashley Mitchell's case serves as a powerful reminder of several truths. First, that defying social conventions always requires courage, and that those who do it deserve respect even when their choices make us uncomfortable. Ashley lived authentically in an era when that was extraordinarily difficult for women. Second, that accidents happen even to the most careful and skilled. Ashley wasn't reckless. She knew her motorcycle, knew her limitations, respected the road. But a patch of gravel, an unfamiliar curve, a second of imperfect judgment, that was enough. Third, that even extensive and well-intentioned searches can fail when geography conspires against them. The people who looked for Ashley in 1957 did everything right with the tools they had. They simply couldn't overcome the limitations of their era. No sonar, no ROVs, no technology that would finally find Ashley 68 years later. For those who loved Ashley, the truth came generations too late. Her parents died without knowing. Her brother spent 80 years wondering. Her best friend Barbara carried the pain of not knowing to the grave. All the people who participated in the original searches, the sheriff, the deputies, the volunteers, Danny Wright at the gas station, George Patterson at the shop, all died without ever knowing what had happened. The truth came to strangers, to a new generation who never knew Ashley Mitchell, for whom she was just an interesting story, not a real person whose absence tore lives apart and left torturous questions for decades. And there's still sadness in the resolution. Ashley Mitchell was 31 years old when she died, with decades of life stolen. She had planned a great motorcycle trip that summer, Portland to the coast and back. She would have taught hundreds more students, might have eventually married or not, would have aged with her passion for riding, would have seen the world change in ways she never imagined. Instead, it all ended in a second of tires losing traction, of momentum carrying her over an edge she didn't see until it was too late, of cold water closing over her as the light disappeared and silence settled in. Lake Pend Oreille kept Ashley Mitchell for 68 years. Water is patient. It makes no judgments, tells no stories, simply keeps what falls into its depths until technology and chance conspire to bring it to light again. Ashley lived free. She rode free. And now, finally properly buried and appropriately remembered, she can rest free. Her story isn't just about tragedy, but about a woman who refused to be limited by her era's expectations, who lived courageously even when it meant living differently, and who is remembered not just for how she died, but for how she lived, with passion, independence, and unwavering courage. The roads of Idaho still call. Motorcyclists still ride along the shore of Lake Pend Oreille, enjoying the same views that Ashley went looking for on that May Day in 1957. And perhaps, if you listen carefully enough, you can almost hear the echo of an Indian chief engine, Ashley Mitchell riding free through the mountains she loved, forever preserved in that moment before the end, when everything was possible and the road stretched infinitely ahead. The mystery was solved. But Ashley Mitchell's spirit, independent, courageous, authentic, remains. Inspiration for anyone who refuses to live within the limits that others establish. Reminding us that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply being yourself.